welcome to the 47th Annual ARNOVA Conference. Yeah. We're already planning for our 50th, then we'll have a big party, even bigger than usual. We've kind of changed how we do the conference this year and are starting out very early with our opening plenary. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on that. You're going to be hearing more about our conference innovations at the lunch and at the membership meeting. I invite you all to attend. We're going to have a slideshow explaining what's happening in ARNOVA. But right now, what I'd just like to do is invite our conference co-chairs to come up and introduce our plenary, get us started, and they'll also add their welcome to you, to Austin and to our conference for this year, which we all hope, the full board hopes you enjoy. So with that, let me bring up Mary Kay Gugerty and Brenda Bushhouse. There's a bit of an echo, maybe we can get rid of that. Our co-chairs for this year's conference.
Yeah, okay. Mary's just realizing she maybe should have introduced herself. So that was Mary Shearhart, the president of the ARNOVA board. So thank you so much, Mary, for 2 more days. Yes, she's the outgoing president of the ARNOVA board. So thanks, Mary, for welcoming us. And welcome everyone to ARNOVA 2018. We're really happy to see you all in Austin. The local arrangements committee, the board, the co-chairs, everyone, the ARNOVA staff have been working really hard, and we're really excited to finally see you all sitting here this morning. I wanted to start by thanking Ohio State University and the John Glenn College of Public Affairs for sponsoring this morning's plenary and helping to make it possible. So thank you to Ohio State University. We did want to highlight a couple of the innovations or changes in the program this year, and as Mary said, we'll talk more about that at lunchtime, but we wanted to mention that we're going to have this afternoon a section meet and greet at 5:45. So this is something new where people can visit different sections, learn about the work that they do before the actual section meetings start at 6:45. So if you want to shop around and make some new ARNOVA friends and try out some new sections, that would be a great time to do that. So I'm going to turn the floor over now to my co-chair, Brenda Bushhouse, who's going to talk about tomorrow's plenary and then introduce the local arrangements committee and this morning's plenary. So thank you again for being here. We're excited to see you over the course of the next couple days.
Thank you, everyone, and welcome. So on Friday, we have our plenary from 8:45 to 10, and the slide is on. So today we're talking about resilience in the face of natural disasters. Tomorrow we're talking about resilience in the face of man-made disasters through policy failures. So we're going to have 4 organizations talking about their work. They work on the front lines. So we have 2 national organizations. Michelle Mendez is coming from the Catholic Legal Immigration Network, and Crystal Massey is from the American Immigration Council. Then we have a Texas organization, Raices, and then we have an Austin shelter, Casa Marianella, and Jennifer Long will be with us. So we hope you will join us tomorrow for the second plenary. And then I just want to introduce Francie Osterauer. She's the former president of ARNOVA, who's going to welcome you.
Good morning, everyone. I am so proud to have had the opportunity to have served as the president of this wonderful association, our wonderful association. And today I am delighted on behalf of the LBJ School's RGK Center for Philanthropy and Community Service to welcome you all here to Austin. I know our center director, David Springer, and all of us, we are so excited to have ARNOVA here. The ARNOVA conference is just a wonderful place to catch up on the latest research in our field, to reconnect with old colleagues and friends, and to meet new ones. And I hope while you're here, you'll also have time to sample some of what Austin has to offer. Enjoy some live music, have some barbecue, and if you're vegetarian or vegan, this is Austin, we have you covered too. So, have a great time, and let me now turn to introduce Will Brown, Director of the Center for Nonprofits and Philanthropy at Texas A&M's Bush School, to kick off the plenary panel. Will.
Good morning. Well, welcome to Texas. It's a pleasure to be able to be here. Thank you, Francie. Thank you for the organizing committee. You can see there's a number of folks. I mean, one of the wonderful things about being here in Texas is the fact that we've got so many wonderful individuals studying nonprofits, working in nonprofit organizations, and it's a real pleasure to be able to be here. I hope you feel some of the enjoyment of Texas. I know it's a little cooler than we had perhaps hoped for, but it's got sunshine out there today, and you can drink the water this week, so that's kind of nice, because you might not realize that in Austin over a couple of weeks ago they had boil warnings in place, so everybody was boiling their water. Well, I'm not a Texan, but I'm told that they love me anyway. So I'm really thrilled to be able to be here as a part of what's going on. And I've been at Texas A&M University for 12 years, so I'm getting there. I think it's probably another 20 or 30 years maybe, and I could call myself a Texan So one of the amazing and genuinely good people that I've had a pleasure to be able to work with is Wynn Rosser, who's the president and CEO of the TLL Temple Foundation. That's in Lufkin, Texas, a place also that you should get a chance to be able to visit. Wynn earned his bachelor's and master's degree and doctoral degree from Texas A&M University. I worked with Wynn at the Bush School when he was president and CEO of the Greater Texas Foundation. We worked with several other colleagues in a collaborative teaching arrangement, so we helped arrange our capstone experience. One of the more enjoyable sort of curricular experiences, educational experiences, where a team of us were able to work together and think about, well, how do we want to structure a learning experience for our students as they engage with clients and interact that way. And so that was 4 or 5 years that Wynn and I got a chance to work together in that role. Wynn is an innovator, marshaling philanthropic capital to change systems that improve the lives of thousands of individuals in the state and really around the country. His work stretches from the Rio Grande Valley in the south to the piney woods of deep East Texas. As president and CEO of the TLL Temple Foundation, he guides the organization to work with families and communities to build a thriving deep East Texas and to alleviate poverty, creating access and opportunities for all. Dr. Rosser was instrumental in bringing together this distinguished panel, which I know you will enjoy this morning. It's just really an amazing group. It's been a pleasure to be able to work with them as we try to get this organized. The panel speaks directly to the conference theme, from relief to resilience, how philanthropy, nonprofits, and volunteers bridge the gap between crisis and sustainability. Please join me to welcome Wynn Rosser as moderator of the opening plenary, Recovery and Community Resilience. Dr. Rosser.
I asked Will to be short, and so thanks, Will. Will's one of the delights of my career is getting to teach at the Bush School and to work with Will Brown. Billions and trillions. Simple in my spirit, rural kid from East Texas. In my 50th year, I've finally kind of gotten my mind around millions. But billions and trillions are numbers that are relevant to our conversation this morning. Hurricane Harvey is the second most costliest storm in our nation's history, second only to Hurricane Katrina. It hit Southeast Texas as a Category 4 hurricane, set record rainfall amounts. Jefferson County, Texas, just to our east, holds the U.S. record for the most rain received at 60 inches. It's 5 feet. In just the 9-county area, the greater Houston metro area, that period, about a week, 9 trillion gallons of rain. I live 2 hours north of where the storm kind of centered over Houston. It rained 7 days nonstop. And what we know about gravity, at least in the rivers in the northern hemisphere, is all that water went south. So 9 trillion isn't really the full estimate. 53 counties were involved. This is kind of a messy map. It's from FEMA. If you want to look at the, kind of study this map, you can Google it and find it on the FEMA website. Those counties there across the south, the east part of Texas, those 53 counties are about the size of the state of Tennessee. In fact, that disaster area of almost 42,000 square miles is larger than 14 United States. With around 900,000 households impacted that registered with FEMA, so this conservative estimate, just think there's one person in each of those households. That's more people than 6 total states each have population, somewhere between the Dakotas and Delaware. So the scope and scale of what we're talking about here as we think about resiliency and from crisis to sustainability is real. This was a challenge not on a local level, it was a challenge on a national level. Of course, we had Hurricane Irma and Maria right after it. And we've got the California wildfires going on right now with 60 people killed, 8,000 homes destroyed. So this isn't the only disaster we could be talking about, but it's the one that is most recent here in Texas, the deadliest storm, the most costly storm in 50 years in Texas. And so it's going to be the context for us as we work through some comments this morning about the things that you're interested in. So for example, about 91,000 volunteers were recorded by FEMA in the first year of response. From a crisis standpoint, we think about crises being a moment in time, hours, days. There's still 17,000 people displaced in temporary housing 15 months later. So for them, the crisis isn't just the immediacy of there's water in my house, there's a flood coming, I've got to get out, I've got to get my medications, clothes. No, you leave all that behind, you just get out. Maybe I lost my car. They've been displaced out of their house for 15 months. In total, 3 million hotel nights. 3 million hotel nights were utilized to house survivors. So this is not a small thing that we're talking about. And to help us understand how nonprofit organizations, how philanthropy, how local organizations, how volunteers reacted, we have a panel of 4 dynamic leaders who have been preparing for this session for several months now. We've had a couple of organizing calls. I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation. We're going to structure it that way. Towards the end, we'll bring you into the conversations. There's a microphone right back here in the middle of the room, right in front of that camera. If you have a question, we'll invite you to step up to that microphone. About 15 or 20 minutes left in the session, so you can engage in the conversation with us. But we're going to start with the panel. And to my left on the stage, Suzanne and Nard. Suzanne is with the Local Initiative Support Corporation, which is headquartered in New York City. But Suzanne actually does all of her work from rural Colorado, where she's been a leader for about 27 years. She's been with LISC for about 13 years. And in this vice presidency role, leads all of their rural work, working across 46 states and 2,000 counties, disaster after disaster. So she has not only a national perspective, but how a national organization responds locally. To my left immediately, Lori Fye. Lori is one of the founding team members of the Rebuild Texas Fund, which may be unique, singularly unique, in that it's a private foundation working with a public charity, not just passing the money off, but really working together to make investments across this impacted Southeast Texas area. Also involves the governor. So 3 different types of organizations involved there. Lori has been at the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation since 2003. She was the first program officer they hired, led a lot of initiatives, and so she's perfectly poised to lead this Rebuild Texas Fund. To my right, Winnell Heron is the group vice president, and Winnell, I'm going to have to look at my notes to get this title right, because it's long. The group vice president for Public Affairs, Diversity, and Environmental Affairs for HEB. And if you're not from Texas, while you're here, you need to go visit an HEB. I grew up shopping with my grandmother just about an hour north of here in HEB, so some of my earliest memories with my grandmother are in HEB. Privately held grocery chain, more than just groceries, about 400 stars statewide and internationally now, too, in Mexico. So Winnell's been with HEB for 30 years. To Winnell's right, Marie Arcos is with the Greater Houston YMCA. She's been there about 13, 14 years now, I think, 30 years total working in the Greater Houston area. Winnell and Marie are both Houston natives. Marie is the Executive Director of Community Development for the YMCA of Greater Houston. So we're going to go national to local. Local being I was there and I lived it and I'm still there and I'm watching my community recover. As we start with this first question, which is really about the intersection of organizations, the interaction of organizations. We hear a lot about cross-sector partnerships and this notion that the problems that we are interested in are so large that no one organization can solve them. This, 100 organizations can't solve the problems that we're looking at in this area of the state. So, but we know that there's a lot of people doing great work, great things are happening, and so we're going to talk about how those organizations were engaged. From a national perspective, we're going to start with Suzanne. And Suzanne, just in your perspective, not just this Hurricane Harvey case, but in others, I know you're working in places right now responding. How do you think about the intersection of different kinds of organizations, the interaction of those organizations as they seek to help communities rebuild and get to sustainable resiliency?
So our role is really long-term recovery. Sometimes we're not right there when it happens because we really are about building infrastructure. And so the way that we have these 86 partners on the ground, so first we engage with our partners on the ground when an event happens. And depending on their focus, in the case of rural Texas, our partner was Communities Unlimited, and they're an RCAP, which means they do a lot of infrastructure. So in rural communities, the water sewer impact was tremendous, and it's usually a one or two man shop that is operating and getting their licenses and maintaining and doing all of that. So our partner on the ground in rural Texas was Communities Unlimited. And so my first call was to them. They had.
And that was an existing relationship?
That was an existing relationship. They're one of our partners, which is what we work with and through our partners on the ground. And I see our role as an aggregator of resources, technical, human, financial, at the national level that we can then funnel down to our folks. And so we asked them what they needed immediately. You called me within 24 hours. And so we were able to push resources to them. But then what we did was we stepped back, talked to them a couple of weeks later, realized that there were 39 communities that they were working with, making sure that they had their T's crossed, their I's dotted with their USDA loans, all of the things that they needed to look at long-term recovery and getting those systems up to speed as quickly, back up to speed as quickly as they could. So we talked to them, we understood the enormity, and we also knew that infrastructure needs housing and economic development. So we decided to take a three-pronged approach. We looked at the resources we thought we might be able to accumulate. If you do this long enough, you have people on speed dial. And then we decided that within our capacity, we could maybe take on 6 to 7 communities and do a deep dive of the trifecta of housing, infrastructure, and economic development. So then we went to work. The sectors that we engaged were obviously the philanthropic from a local level, a national level, the Red Cross. We also have bank partners that we engaged.
I should say, the foundation prioritizes 23 Texas counties, one Arkansas county, really interested in rural counties, and 11 of our Texas counties were in the disaster declaration. So that's why Suzanne got a call from me really soon.
Yeah, we had been talking about
We'd been talking
working
about
and
things.
collaborating together, and
So that was an existing relationship too, although a new one.
right, yeah, we had had a couple of conversations. So Harvey pushed engagement.
We'll come back to some of those points that you raised. I think existing relationships, I want to explore those, and then also as you think about partners on the ground.
Capacity.
So from Communities Unlimited to more local, we'll come back to this. And I know YMCA has a great example of this, and so does HEB. Is you've got people there who live there who typically serve clients who themselves now are displaced and trying to recover. Lori, as you think about working from a state perspective, the Rebuild Texas Fund came together conceptually like within just a few days after the storm. I guess while it was still really raining. And so you had to go from putting something together legally, operating, how does the governor's office, the One Star Foundation, the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation operate together? So I mean, that's just 3 sectors in and of itself, but you knew you wanted to work across this area where there was so much damage. So how do you think about intersection of agencies, organizations, and the intersection of cross-sector work?
Well, you're right. When the whole idea for the Rebuild Texas Fund was born out of the notion of partnership, out of a conversation that the Dells had with the governor. In the wake of this, as you may know, if you're from Texas, both Michael and Susan are native Texans. Michael's from Houston. His home community was one of the ones that was featured in the floods, Meyerland in Houston. So they felt very personal about this significant disaster and wanted to do something really significant to make a difference, but again knew that there was no way one organization could tackle that because of what was already apparent about the scope and scale. So in a conversation with the governor, this idea was born that we would actually come together. We were very fortunate to very quickly meet our colleagues at the One Star Foundation, without whom this would absolutely not have been possible. And partnered up quickly and set a very ambitious goal to raise $100 million in private philanthropy that was specifically focused on the later stages of recovery and rebuilding. Already the outpouring of generosity from across the country and frankly around the world was amazing, and we wanted to be able to garner that generosity and really focus it in a way that helped people move beyond just immediate relief. And we're still right in the middle of that.
With the goal of spending $100 million over a 2-year period?
About a 2 to 3 year period. One of the things that you mentioned about the size of this disaster that we constantly keep in mind is that while $100 million is a lot of money in absolute terms, the impact of that storm is over $1 billion. And so we know that we have to be very, very focused, very strategic about finding the places where philanthropy can actually make a significant difference. And so we've continued to rely on our cross-sector partnerships. We work with mayors, county judges, county extension agents, school superintendents, nonprofit leaders in every one of the communities in the 41 counties where we're focused. And we couldn't do what we're doing without those partnerships because most of us are in Austin. We're not in those impacted areas. We rely on those folks who are there, can tell us who's doing the best work for them, tell us what their priorities are, what their biggest needs are, where they see their biggest gaps. And we only can function because of those partnerships.
And you had to build those in a relatively short period of time.
Very short amount of time. Very short amount of time.
So time in the immediate response to the crisis is an interesting thing. And then we want to talk some as we move through the panel about, okay, so what does this mean for the way that we prepare and continue to prepare? Mm-hmm. I missed saying that on that map, there's some counties coded in orange. They've had 5 disasters in the last 5 years. They've been part of 5 federal disaster declarations. So this is not something that is a one-off. This is something that happens repeatedly. And we know there will be another hurricane. So those orange counties on there in that map are the ones that have had the 5 disasters in the last 4 or 5 years, declarations. So these are counties that are still recovering from the last disaster, and then you get hit with another one. So now, when you think about being a part of a for-profit corporation that is still family held, privately held, that is deeply invested and rooted in Texas and always has been, you have stores, all throughout this, this disaster area. So, I mean, there's the interesting thing about how does a corporation rebuild itself and get its stores back up and running. But I think one of the most interesting things was, I remember the picture from Mr. Butt, although he wants to be called Charles. Always be Mr. Butt to me. He's sitting in your operations center. I mean, he's got he's got a baseball cap on. He's there. He's involved. You can tell that the CEO is a part of this effort. And so it was about taking care of your customers who, again, going back to my grandmother and shopping, these weren't customers, these were neighbors and friends.
Right.
And so you've got your employees, your people that shop at your stores every week. One of the most interesting things that I saw was you had kitchens that were out feeding people different locations, different parts of the day. And so you're doing that kind of work. At the same time, you're trying to get inventory back in the stores. So talk some about how you think about the way you engage from a corporate perspective to serve the communities where you're based.
Yeah, it's a very complex process. You know, people think, how difficult can it be to sell milk, eggs, bread? Sounds pretty simple, right? Well, when you think about inventory management and replenishment, so you know, the first thing for us when we hear of a storm coming in is we know that customers are going to be coming to our stores to purchase supplies, whether it's water, ice, non-perishable products, fill their prescriptions, fill their tanks with gas. And so we want to make sure that we're there and able to support that. And really our stand is last to close, first to open, because we know how important we play in people being prepared for the disaster before it strikes. So there's a lot of work that goes on around ensuring we've got the appropriate inventory levels and products to take care of our customers. And many times our stores face a lot of damage as well. So once the storm rolls through, in Harvey in particular, we had over 150 of our facilities that were directly impacted and closed as a result of Hurricane Harvey. There were
150 out of 400.
Out of 400. There were 120 locations in the greater Houston area, and then we had 36 stores in our Gulf Coast area that were closed. And you have, as you mentioned, we have 110,000 partners company-wide. So you've got partners or employees in those locations that are also personally impacted, that are trying to be there to support the community with the store. So we really look at how do we ensure that we're there to support the customers, how do we make sure we're there for our partners, and then most importantly, how do we help be a big part of the rebuilding process in our communities. So you mentioned the mobile kitchens. We have, at the time of Harvey, we had 2 mobile kitchens. So I can describe it. You think about an 18-wheeler, it's about 45 feet long, converted an 18-wheeler into a full commercial kitchen that can serve 3,500 to 4,000 hot meals an hour, which is a big deal if you're a first responder or you're law enforcement or you're a family that's been impacted to receive a hot meal. So we set up, you've probably seen this in some of the social media coverage that we got, we served over 60,000 hot meals across the state of Texas over a 2-week time period. And these are great items, and it's just, once again, kind of rebuilding and reinforcing that we're here with you. We donated water, ice, disaster supplies. We have disaster relief units so that we can come in and help. So if there's not a power source, not a water source, we're completely self-contained. We have a bunkhouse so we can have our disaster teams come in. They don't have to worry about where they're going to sleep. We have that accommodation for them. We've converted several trailers. We have showers. We have a mobile pharmacy. If you're in an area that's been devastated, and getting prescriptions is a really big concern for folks. So we have a mobile pharmacy that we set up. We also have a business center that we set up so that folks can get money. So there are just so many pieces that go in. We provide water. We provide ice. We provide water tankers that allow people to get potable water to take back to their homes. So it's a huge operation, but it's one that we've been engaged with as a company for many, many years. I will say that Hurricane Harvey really tested us because it significantly impacted 2 areas of our business simultaneously, right? So we have stores in Gulf Coast, we have a bunch of stores in Houston. The storm hit Rockport and passed. It was really a wind event, but it was very damaging. Then it transitioned to Houston, and it rained in Houston forever. And speaking about Maryland, I live in Bel Air, which is the next community over from Maryland. So we set up conference calls. We have the emergency command centers. We have individuals across our company working together to coordinate and make sure that we're getting product to the stores. that can handle it. We're getting product to the community. We have contacts on the ground that can help us distribute that product. We're also working to see the facilities, if they're impacted, how do we get them up and running? We had 88 stores that were on generator power for a number of days just to get back in operation. So it's very complex.
So when you roll those resources in, those things that where you come in at no charge to the community with
Right.
potable water, with hot meals, with the bunkhouses, who do you interact with in a local community to make sure that you're at the right place, that you're not going to be a burden on the community, that you're really there to fulfill the role that you intend? So who helps you coordinate that on a local level?
Yeah, so we work very closely with, so for example, in Houston, work very closely with the mayor, Mayor Turner, and County Judge Ed Emmett and their teams. We also work closely with nonprofit organizations. The food bank is another big partner of ours, the Red Cross, the YMCAs, because we want to show up where the need is the greatest. And we know we can bring a lot of resources, but we've got to be in the right place at the right time. So those communications and those relationships are ongoing. And so when disaster does strike, people have my cell phone number, I have the cell phone number of all the key elected officials, and we work together to make sure we can.
Again, this notion of time and preparation, you had the bunkhouse, you had the showers, you had the pharmacy, you had the kitchens. So we're going to come back in just a moment and talk, okay, so what did we learn from this experience? And again, how does that help us think through the next time? So I'll be interested to hear how you're thinking about it corporately, but a corporation that really does serve its communities. Marie, so you're also a Houstonian, not only a Houstonian, a native Houstonian. You've always worked in the nonprofit sector in the Houston area. You are at this organization, so you think about the why, it's the local why. No, what did you say, 4,300 employees. You were operate across 9 counties. So this is not a small organization. You were really involved in helping the community come back. You have an organizing background. You're around community development. How do you think about the people you serve, the communities you're a part of, and the organizations you interact with in this moment of crisis?
Well, I think the most important piece that the Y was able to play in not only Harvey but also in Katrina is that we are in the 9 county areas. We had 33 YMCAs, a camp. So we're able to open up our facilities immediately. And so while, depending on our leadership, the way that they want to make our facilities available for disasters varies. Red Cross has approached us about being shelters, and so some of those pieces in risk management and stuff weren't approved. But at Harvey, we just set that aside. We said where our buildings and our facilities and our gymnasiums and our camps can help house people, house employees, house people that live in our communities, not just members of the Y, but the whole community. So wherever we could step up and open our buildings and facilities, that's what we did. Red Cross reached out to us. We were going to be a shelter for 2 neighborhoods, but people couldn't get to us. So those YMCAs weren't affected, but people from the water and the freeways could not get to us, so we had to change those. Those became distribution sites for people to drop off goods, and people could come and pick them up. Also, nonprofits, in order to survive in today's times, we have to work collaboratively. We can't work alone, no matter how large the organization is. We're a global organization. We're in 119 countries. We're in every city across the nation. And all of these YMCAs across the nation called, can I come down? Can I be there for your child care facility? Can we help? Can we send our facilities people down to help clear and muck houses? How can we come down? Money came flowing through to help immediate crisis of our families and members, our employees. So the amount of folks coming through to just through this one nonprofit in channeling support to over 60,000 of our members and then the communities we're in was overwhelming, coupled with what was happening on a county level.
And because of the late August timeframe, you were still staffed up from your summer camps.
Yeah. And
how important was that as a matter of having, your staff was really much larger than it would have been 3 weeks later, right?
Absolutely. So because of schools, time stood still, for all the stories and the news and everything that people were watching across the nation and those living it in our city, time just stood still. And we survived because people stepped out to help each other. So when children were not in school and parents were trying to figure out how do I rebuild our lives, right? And children are on their arms, children are all over the place. trying to figure out, we're right in the middle of school starting, so the YMCA did what it did best. We're the largest child care provider in the nation, so we set up pop-up camps. We had agreements with Centerpoint and Reliant where previously we go in there and we will provide 24-hour care for their children, right? So the same thing. So we have recently entered an agreement with the Houston Food Bank. One of their crises was that they needed to be there on hand to help distribute the food, and the donations were coming through, but they needed all hands on deck. So what happened with their family when they were caring for other folks, right? So nonprofits not only provided that self-care for employees that were working and volunteers who were working 24 hours a day for over 2 weeks strong, right? We were able to help take care of their children and make sure and ensure them that the folks that we had interacting with the children had volunteer background checks, right? They're accustomed to working with children. They're in the youth development field. We took teachers, that weren't in the schools. We brought them in as our volunteers that we knew that they were immediately in place. So since then, we created some really strong agreements. United Way, same thing. We went in and ran a camp there. Across the city, we had pop-up camps where families could bring their children in so that they could go and take care of their homes. So we showed up in a lot of different ways in the county and the city, their largest shelters. When the city was setting up for their shelter, we had 14,000 residents that came in night one. That next morning, the mayor brought together his command unit. So I happened to be in the room, and they're like, what are we going to do with the children? And I said, the YMCA and the parks have been in conversations about having a zone, an area for the children in the shelter. And they said, well, we can't, and many of those families, this was just the day after, and many of the employees couldn't get to the shelter, to the GRB at the shelter. So they asked, what can you do, Marie? And I was like, we have 40 volunteers. We have all these donations that have been coming in. We gathered those 40 volunteers. We separated them. Where are our teachers? Who knows what kind of supplies to go and get? Give me some logistic people. Within 2 hours, we had an area larger than this set up for full child care. And the next day, we were able to bring in staff to help make sure that we were running an efficient operation.
So I was involved in a shelter at Texas A&M for Katrina, and it was amazing to see families come in. We had college students that were there, and these families that on a bus for 24 hours coming from New Orleans to Shreveport to Dallas, back down to College Station. And to see them just come in and know that they could hand their child to someone, they'd be played with, taken care of. It's an amazing thing to see, that level of trust that you can establish in a really short period of time, but it allowed them to focus on other things than making sure their children were fed and cared for. So I think that's, you think about organizations and communities, and so another data point here is 1.4 million Texas public school children from 117 school districts were out of school for at least a week. It's 25% of our 5.3 million public school students. So you think just about the number of extra people that are around that have to be taken care of that are normally in a formal system where at least between 8 and 3 they're cared for. That's an incredible benefit and contribution back to take care for our youngest resources. So thank you for that work. Lori, it's not something I'd thought about until just sitting here, but thinking about organizational capacity and what existed. So the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation is a high capacity organization. You disperse about $100 million a year normally, but now you're dispersing, along with the One Star Foundation, an additional $50 million a year. So that's a different kind of capacity. So can you quickly just kind of say, what have you had to do internally to do that well, responsibly, wisely, to get that impact you said you were looking for, that we're invested in with you? And then talk some about on-the-ground capacity, what you're doing to identify that. Then we'll go to Suzanne. I've got kind of the same question, because I know you went through a lot of different organizations finding those that would be on the ground, and then we'll come back over and talk about this element of time and preparation with Marie and Monel.
Well, you're right. It was a really big and very quick start because it was still raining when the idea was born on a Tuesday, and on Friday, Michael and Susan and the governor were announcing it on national TV on Good Morning America. So in that amount of time, we were just actually reliving part of this, getting the website up, being prepared to take donations, being prepared on the back end with our friends at One Star to actually receive those donations, which came in just showers of mail and every other format that you can imagine. So very quickly, I think much like the communities that were in crisis mode, everybody dropped everything. And we have 70 people in the headquarters here in Austin, and there's probably only a very few who didn't have something to do with the startup of the fund. So our HR team, our legal team, our, everyone, the technology team, the communications team, everyone just dropped everything to actually do what they needed to do in this moment of crisis, which was a great benefit. Luckily, because of existing, one theme I'm hearing is existing relationships. Because of existing relationships, we were able to quickly pull together the right people. They called me. I was actually out of the country. I came rushing back. We were able to hire very quickly some very high-quality resources that gave us a running start at getting the work done.
The benefit of a private organization, you can do things without, you can sole source things without having to go through lengthy processes.
We were not encumbered.
We don't always take advantage of that flexibility, but in this case you did.
Yeah, we were not encumbered by anything other than trying to do the absolute best we could as quickly as we possibly could. And I'm happy to say, even 15 months later, there were some really important things that we did very, very right. And one of those was the selection, was partnering with One Star Foundation. There's just no question that we would not have been able to do what we've been able to do without that very strong partnership. And we count that as one of our greatest,
So on that,
smartest moves.
I said I thought it was singular. I'm just not aware of another case where, it's not unusual for a private foundation to make a grant and have somebody else administer it, but that's not what's going on here. You guys are working together on this. I've seen you and Chris Bugby from One Star in a lot of things together in your respective teams. You're partners in this. You're doing what you do really well. They're doing what they do really well. Is it singular? Is there another?
We've looked and we don't see an example. There are a couple of examples. So there's the 9/11 fund that was started in the wake of that. So similarly motivated by a crisis situation. But we don't see another working model like ours. We don't see another working model.
Building?
Well, we think we will be spending a lot of time actually reflecting on and articulating what made this work well, so that others can take advantage of what we learned, both the positive learnings and some of the things that we learned the hard way. But what we had to, one of the things about the foundation is that we're focused on children's issues, primarily education and health, and so a lot of the aspects of the Rebuild Texas work were new to us. By design, we went out with 6 program areas that included small business, because we knew, particularly in our smaller communities, how critically important small business was going to be to the comeback of that community. And community and economic development, that's not an area of programmatic expertise for us. So we knew we had some things that we needed to learn very quickly, and we needed to be sure we could find the resources to bring that to us. But one of the things about that I think we all share up here is that we represent very trusted partners and trusted brands, and that opens a lot of doors. And even when you're trying to form new relationships in communities where you haven't been before, and we were very fortunate in that way.
Trust can be shared if you have the right partners.
Right.
Yeah. Suzanne, so you're in Colorado. You work across 46 states, 22,000 counties, like I said earlier. So you've got a lot of relationships in places, but you're not from here. And so how important is it to have people working alongside you who are from here, not just from Texas, but from the counties that are impacted? And how do you think about that in terms of the partner identification? And then this isn't your first disaster. You've worked many over your years with LISC. How do you think about the things that have worked well over time, what might have worked well somewhere else, but didn't particularly work well here in this particular case?
So I think one thing to always remember is that if you've been to one rural community in this nation, you've been to one rural community. And so understanding that, I live in a rural community, population 1,248. So I think what we brought to the table was this kind of global reach, national expertise. I always say that the most important thing we do and that we bring to our members is connecting them to each other. But I do see us as a connector. I also think the word that keeps coming to my mind is leverage. Leveraging local relationships. We have a LISC office in Houston, amazing executive director who I actually have a great friendship with. So we immediately started collaborating because she does know Texas. She lives here, she breathes it. She knows the community and economic development and housing world. So right away we were on speed dial. And then the other thing is as I said, and I can't say this enough, we work with and through our partners on the ground. And those 46 states and those 2,000 rural counties, that's their geography, and it's ours by connection. And so having Communities Unlimited on the ground, working with those 39 local governments, making sure they already had relationships. Many of them, they had helped them put their their packages together to put their water sewer infrastructure in. So they had those relationships. So our in the communities was that leveraging our relationship with Communities Unlimited. We knew they were really good, and we had a little bit of a dance because they were fairly new and they didn't know what all we could bring to the table. But I think leveraging both of those relationships, they gave us a short list of the local governments that they felt had the capacity and the openness, to lack of a better phrase, to let us be of assistance. So what we did then was we needed to find a housing group to work in those that could work in those 10 communities. And we had Communities Unlimited does infrastructure and they do economic development. So we knew we had that covered. And so we really just rolled up our sleeves and started reaching out to colleagues that we knew in Texas. I'm on the National Rural Housing Coalition Board. So reaching out to those folks, reaching out to the Texas CDC Association. Matt was a great resource. But we also just Googled. We went through, we had, I think in the beginning, like 85 organizations. They didn't all work in those communities, but they were adjacent, and we figured maybe we could broker them to branch out. So we looked at 990s, we looked at websites, and then we came down to about 12 organizations that we felt had the housing chops, so to speak, to maybe be part of a recovery strategy. So I think leveraging and acknowledging right off the bat, you know what, we want to bring resources to the folks on the ground. We're not going to parachute in and do things. We build capacity that we want to stay in those communities long term.
And importantly, not competitive resources, because one thing that often happens is you have a national organization come in and they draw resources from the community. You brought resources in from outside, and that's
we do not cannibalize.
State, federal,
we do not
philanthropic.
cannibalize. If it's something that local folks can go after, we stay out of it, and we try to be not a takeaway game, but an add. We bring resources that traditionally might not have come into those communities. That's our goal.
So we're going to come to you in about 10 minutes. So if you have a question, a really powerful question that's in your mind, you can start thinking about it, and I'll invite you to step back to the microphone in just a minute. But I want to turn to Winnell and Marie to talk some about this notion of time and preparation. What did you already have in place? What did you already think you knew about responding to storms from Katrina? And what worked especially well this time that you think should be a part of our thinking about next time?
Okay, I'll go first. So we have a Director of Emergency Preparedness at HEB. We have a team of folks. We have a plan. This isn't our first rodeo. Since we're in Texas, I'll use that analogy. But it was very different, once again, because of the scale and scope, and it impacted so many of our communities and so many of our stores and our customers. So because we had a playbook, because we've done this before, we all knew what we needed to do. We also know the Butt family and what their expectations are, and you talk about time standing still. It stood still for us. The other piece of it is just do what's right. So we made decisions very quickly based on we're going to do what's right for our customers and our communities. And as a result of that, the things that we had invested in after Hurricane Rita and Ike and Katrina really paid off. Now, since then, we've purchased and built a third mobile kitchen that we launched a couple of months ago. We've also been focused on actual generator power in all of our stores, so you don't have to bring in generators. There's a generator that exists, because once again, yeah, we're a grocery store, we sell groceries, but you would be surprised the sense of normalcy that brings to people when their local grocery store is open. And we literally had people lined and cars in the parking lot waiting for us to open. There were lines of people waiting for us to open and applauding our partners when the doors opened and excited about being able to come in. So we don't take that for granted. We know that's an important piece. And then the last component is continuing to strengthen those partnerships. We set aside product. Today, we have a warehouse with water and disaster supplies, potable meats that we can distribute to the community that doesn't take away from inventory in our stores. So we don't want customers not to be able to get the items they need in our stores, but we also want to have those products for those vulnerable communities and folks that need it the most. So we have those things prepared. We have teams of people that are ready to stand up with a phone call. Someone mentioned Austin and the boil water ban. In 72 hours, we had 275 truckloads of water come to Austin. We also donated 15 truckloads to food banks, school districts, because we had schools that were in place that had maybe 1 bottle of water per student for that day. So you think about 300 truckloads of water, drinkable bottled water, in less than 72 hours. So Hurricane Harvey was, one of those monster storms and experiences, but there are things that are happening each and every day across the state of Texas that are impacting our communities, and so we want to be there to support them.
So when you think about resiliency, in crisis, it's not always the one that makes the news.
Right.
Not having drinkable water is a pretty big crisis, Marie, the role the YMCA played before previous disasters, emergencies, what you did during Hurricane Harvey, and how you're thinking about that as the next time will come at some point. What are the things that you learned that you think will be a part of your playbook going forward?
I think the things that we learned most were that we had to be flexible with existing policies and also making sure that everybody was on board in terms of knowing ahead of time where we would deploy our staffing. So we had to keep people there that would man our house and business and take care of our employees, right? And then those that are accustomed to working in the community and in our youth development world, making sure that along the way make sure our youth development workers are receiving the mental health training that's being offered so that when we are working with our children, when we're out of school, the external environment that children are exposed to, it's 80% of their life, right? So between school and after school hours and enrichment programs, they're in the care of other folks, right? So we want to make sure that the YMCA, one, we're training our staff, but also that we're also helping to make sure that we can help train other development workers so that we can be there for the children in the long haul. Just because we look like things are back to normal and business is normal, we're just now starting to see some of the residual effects of, a year and a half later. Not everything happens right off the bat. And especially with our most vulnerable populations and understanding what that really means, that folks that are living under-resourced and underserved communities live with trauma and crises every day, right? And so they may not seem that they still are in need of those services. So we're trying to stay ahead of the game and making sure that we continue to work with other organizations, especially in the mental health world field and in our immigration and refugee resettlements, those silent populations and our senior populations. So staying in working collaborations and coalitions to know what's happening after, and then how are we preparing for that next role, and then how the YMCA's reach can continue to play a part. As we were closing down the shelter, Maria was kicking up, and so our YUSA team was calling and what can we tell Puerto Rico right now? What are your things that you learned over these past 2 weeks that we may not know? And we have a emergency response plan that's a national plan and such, but we're able to take the life lessons immediately and tweak things and move them forward. And then with the Red Cross, with our children, we're doing the pillowcase project. We're teaching our children what to do in case of an emergency so they can be of help with their families, right? So we continue to deliver programming through our partners and through our funding entities where they said this is really important for the next time this happens or to help continue to cope with the state that they're living in. So being that resource outside of what we traditionally do and being relevant to the community is one of the things that we're doing in terms of making sure that we're ready and prepared for that next time.
Thank you, Marie. So we're going to come to you next after what will be a really quick challenge to our panelists. So we're in this room full of people who care about the nonprofit sector and the role that volunteers play. So if there's one thing that you think would be an area that academics and researchers should look at, what can we learn from, where would we help, like this model building idea maybe, what is something that you would like to put in front of this group as an area for research, inquiry, looking into from your experience through Hurricane Harvey? Before, I'm going to let you think about that just a second. Before I do it, I think the common things here, themes, flexibility, trust, relationships, preparation, this notion that this is an ongoing crisis. It's not over. We still have a lot of people who were affected the previous year and the previous year. And so how do you build resiliency? We could spend a lot of time talking about the partnerships and the collaborations that were in place and what's been strengthened and how do you protect that and preserve it, and what do you do in the meantime while you're waiting to make sure those relationships and that trust is maintained. There's a lot of things that we could explore here, and so perhaps those are things that you can talk about over your coffee breaks and over lunch conversations. You know, what's the role that you and your colleagues in the field can contribute back to us to help us think about some of those things. And so if anyone has a question, if you don't, I do, I'll keep going. If you have questions, step back to the microphone here in the middle of the room. We'll start with Suzanne, go down really quickly. Just what's the one thing that you think someone in an academic setting might be able to help us do to learn from this and to think about, well, what happened?
So for me, in the rural space, capacity. The lack of capacity between events, the diminished capacity post-event. You know, in a rural community, it's just highlighted. I always say, a quick story, I always say that whatever happens in a rural community, whether it's good or bad, if you think of a puddle, you throw a rock in it, it ripples all the way to the edge. It gets every part of that community. You throw that same rock in a lake and it sinks, right? You don't see that impact. So good or bad, it is exasperated in a rural community. So that capacity for the nonprofit organizations to be able to rebound, to do the resiliency work in between, that capacity is also financial. Dollars going into the community, so there are revolving loan funds for housing rehab that can build in resiliency between events. All of that is something that is, we're working in rural Texas, rural anywhere, but focused on rural Texas. That has been a tremendous challenge. And so we want to be part of that thought process and that fixing the in between, because the really hard work should happen in between events.
Yeah. Lori, one thing quickly.
Well, I have a list of 10, but I'm going to tell you only my top one, and that is data. One of the things that we are we're self-prescribed data geeks at the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation, and one of the biggest difficulties for us was how difficult it was to actually get your hands on data about where the greatest need was. So it hit 41 counties. It did not hit them universally. We wanted the data to tell us where to go first and where the pockets of need actually were. And to this day, we still struggle with that. So I think anybody who's also on the data train with us, we would love to talk to you about how it is that you provide or start to put some information out into the world that helps us identify what data should be available immediately for people like us who want to make really smart, thoughtful decisions, for people like Suzanne, who are trying to figure out of the multiple rural counties and communities, which are the ones that need us first. I think that would be the one thing that I wish we had more of.
Winnell, one thing.
I think when I think about it, it's ensuring that personally you're prepared, right? So we talk about corporations planning, nonprofits, government entities being prepared. I think we can't underestimate the importance of individuals and families being prepared as well, because if you have families that are prepared, then the community is better prepared to deal with it. And I think one of the things we saw there was a stark difference, I think, between Katrina and Harvey was you had so many individuals step up and provide support, whether it was the Cajun Navy or bringing boats. We saw a lot of that. So not underestimating the importance of the individual and the action and role that we can play for our families and for our communities.
Marie, something that you think would be good for this group to take into account?
I think harnessing the power of anchor institutions, so colleges, universities, students, and really playing and allowing people to continue to play a role in this preparation for the future that's going to hit us in terms of disasters. But using those folks and the nonprofits that have a reach deep into the communities and are there every day, continuing to educate them. There are, the data is important for our funders and for our planners to know what to do, but we also need to help educate those that are still living in the crisis to know what their options are. They're at a standstill right now where they can't move anymore. They're frozen because they've made so many decisions and life-changing and everything. So we need to be there for them. So continuing to use universities, congregations of churches where people gather and they want to continue to do good. We need to allow a platform where people can continue to be educated, know what still needs to be done, and really allow people to go out and serve their neighbors and their communities.
So we've got a line here. We've got 10 minutes. And so if you can make sure your question is a question and get it out quick, we'll let one person take a shot at it and get it through as many as we can. Who's first?
Thank you. Saleha Kumawala from the University of Houston, professor of accounting specializing in nonprofit and founding director of the SURE program, stimulating urban renewal through entrepreneurship. Okay, my question to all of you is, and anyone can answer, how did you use the help from personalities like J.J. Watt and interfaith organizations in your relief work?
What was the last part? How do we use the
role of personalities like J.J. Watt.
And interfaith organizations, interfaith.
Interfaith,
Interfaith.
okay.
Interfaith
Yeah.
organizations. Go ahead, or you take that one.
We were the great beneficiaries of a number of incredibly generous celebrities like J.J. Watt. I don't know if you all remember seeing the Hand in Hand benefit that was nationwide, star-studded, and raised millions of dollars both for Texas and other communities that had been hit by hurricanes. That has been a very powerful partnership, I would say, and I really appreciate that people use those platforms for good. That's part of my yardstick. On the interfaith organizations, I mean, we work in a lot of communities that are so small, they have to be interfaith. I mean, they don't have a choice. If they're gonna get their work done and help their neighbors, there are no, whatever barriers might have pre-existed Harvey came crashing down in the wake of this storm, which has been great. But we rely on all of those organizations to partner as partners because much like others have said, we're not the experts and they are, and we want to be sure we're bringing all of that capability and generosity to bear.
Another place where relationships are really important. Thank you for your question. Yes, ma'am.
Hi there, Lisa Baza from Baruch College. My question is, in the aftermath of a disaster like Hurricane Harvey, how do you get the word out that services are available, especially when there's no phone service or internet?
Yeah, I'll answer that one because I didn't mention it before. Social media was incredibly powerful for us and for so many others, and we're seeing it now with the wildfires as well. So one of the things I think there's been a lot of disruption around how people get news and information, and social media is a huge benefit to that. So we use a lot of social.
Good and evil, but yeah, so the same thing for you at the Y?
Yeah, same thing, social media. So we, internet stayed up, and so people were still able to receive the transmissions. But even a group in Fort Bend of young people, they created an app so young people could check on young people, right, and ask, how are you doing, what's going on? And I see as technology continues to rapidly change day by day now that's going to be an integral part of us, making sure that information is given out. We also need to assess the gaps of this diverse communities that we're living in and really make sure that information was being translated into their native languages and their cultures and beliefs. So if we have people coming into shelters and they have religious beliefs, are we able to accommodate diverse needs as we're treating everyone with respect and dignity?
So Houston, greater Houston area, 100+ languages spoken, incredible, one of the most diverse city in the country, actually.
It is.
So great point there to think about that this isn't a monolithic community. It's made up of a lot of different kinds of people. Next question.
My name is John Palmer Smith. Although I'm mostly retired, I still teach a couple of graduate courses in nonprofit management leadership. My question really focuses on long-term prevention and advocacy. It's not just building the third mobile kitchen, but I'm really interested in what your organizations or what you think nonprofit organizations ought to be doing in terms of educating the public and advocating on issues like climate change and global warming, which causes these disasters in increasing severity and frequency.
A couple of reactions. You remind me on our planning calls, we surfaced that, is crisis management taught in nonprofit management programs? And what is the role of your preparation programs as you're preparing the next generation of nonprofit leaders to be sitting on this stage and to be serving their communities, whether local or national? So that's one thing. There are certainly a lot of organizations and philanthropic and others that are working on climate change and advocacy. I think there's always more that can be done there. Closer in, I'll say, I think one of the really important things is the damage that was done in Houston. A lot of those homes were in historic flood zones that had flooded before, and we knew they were going to flood again. So what's the role around advocacy close in, around development, around the amount of concrete that's poured, around where houses are built? People lost their entire life savings. All of our wealth usually is in our homes, and they lost everything, and it's not clear that they're going to be able to rebuild in those places. So quickly, anybody want to talk about, anything about climate change and advocacy?
The one thing I would say, and it's not really climate change and advocacy, but long term, what are nonprofits doing? What we are doing is we are implementing a disaster resiliency training for our organizations, because our rural organizations often, they're just trying to keep the lights on and do what they do. And so having that as, we have a pre-session at our seminar that'll start, and then we'll start doing regional trainings to build that core competency in each of the regions in the rural spaces, because that capacity is so important as well.
Well, you say there is a group of Texas environmental grant makers. It's called EGG, Environmental Grant Makers Group, and advocacy around what you're talking about is a part of what they do. So it's the larger issue of the climate, and it's also closer in what can communities do to be better prepared and to better advocate for themselves in the way communities develop around environmental and community issues. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Elena McCollum, University of San Diego. And this question I think applies closer to the local level, but it's really addressed to any of the panelists. What mechanisms are in place for persons to be able to provide feedback when they're receiving emergency aid, if they encounter issues that might need attention having to do with logistics or anything like that? For example, telephone hotlines, is it just done via face-to-face informal dialogue? And relatedly, what do we know about what's being done to collect data on how the feedback loop is going, whether the feedback loop is being closed? If you could, and I would also be happy to discuss further offline. Thank you.
How are you getting feedback on what's going on in communities?
Well, the tack that we took from the beginning was to be community-led. And so we intentionally have people in communities. Christina Cornejo's here with us today, who's in the Coastal Bend every week, all week, every week. And so I would say it takes more of an informal, conversation and dialogue, but I think it's a really interesting question, because it would be an interesting one to know how people actually find services and how they voice their satisfaction with the services that they find.
And given the distributed local power across communities and counties especially, how does all that ever roll up into a plan that would matter in the face of that geographic region that's as large as states? I think it's a really interesting question. We have these local planning organizations, regional planning organizations, we have councils of government, we have all kinds of regional units, but it would be interesting to think about how do individual citizens provide input and feedback into that, even as they're coming back into some state of normal. Yeah.
So we're part of being part of coalitions and long-term recovery groups. So part of it is when we're talking about children, but you can't just talk about a child without talking about the whole family unit and the person and the people that are receiving the housing vouchers and things that are going on with the air quality and things like that. So staying in tune with what the coalitions are doing, it's very time consuming, but being committed to that and getting the feedback from the nonprofits or the people that are working with the families day in day, and the individuals or the seniors or whichever targeted population, we're getting the feedback from there. And because we're committed to working with all of our entities, our municipalities, with the city and the county that are addressing these bigger systemic issues, we're able to provide back the feedback. And so we were meeting monthly, and now we've moved to a quarterly and more of a resilience focus versus an immediate recovery focus. So we're gathering that information from people that are working with families and individuals in the communities day in, day out, and making sure we push that forward and make sure it's being addressed.
How you make sure it bubbles up and
One
is
thing I'll
widely
say about
distributed.
social media, though, is that it actually plays a really significant role. I would say the most, because of how quickly we're working to deploy the fund, we don't have a lot of survey time and resources, but social media, the comments that come back on the Facebook pages, those kinds of things are actually great indicators for us to tell us we're doing this part well, we may be overlooking another part. So it's played a surprising role in the feedback mechanism for us.
Some content analysis on social media would be a really interesting thing to do as a follow-up. Okay, one last real quick question, and we'll let you go on to your next sessions.
Hi, my name is Margaret Adams, and I'd like to come back to the question of capacity. Knowing that we rely very heavily on nonprofits to help move our recovery forward, how can state and local governments help support those nonprofits that are standing up in face of a disaster, build that capacity so that they are resilient in future disasters? Thank you.
Thank you. That was a statement, or is that a question?
How can we?
What can we do? Yeah. Got it. Okay.
How can local governments help support those nonprofits?
Yeah, so we do a whole other panel on that. But anybody want to? So from a group of organizations that work with nonprofits, what can be done to help build that capacity so that it's there the next time?
I guess, and this is going to be a really brief answer to a really long conversation, but I think, first of all, the relationships, building the relationships, thinking about resources, thinking about maintaining resources within a county or a region. Example, and this is not a political statement, but CDBG-DR, if that would come in and be part of a seed for a revolving loan fund that you could leverage, and that local governments, county governments, they can be the voice for that in rural Texas.
So like I said, this could be a much longer conversation. There is a Center for Disaster Philanthropy. So there is an organized way for philanthropy to participate in these conversations on an ongoing basis. If you have an interest in some of the things that we've talked about, that would be a good place to make a contact. Several of us have sessions that we're going to next, but we'll stay here and talk for a few minutes here at the front. If you have questions, love to interact with you and engage with you. Our information, our contact information, I think is in your conference information. So if you have things you'd like to follow up on, please do contact us. This is something that, the four people to my left and right are thinking about all day, every day. I think about it a little bit. So please help me thank Suzanne, Lori, Winnell, and Marie for their time this morning. And have a great conference.
Thank you so much. Yes, thank you, and also for excellent moderation. So this has been an amazing panel. It's really given us a lot of food for thought, a lot of questions that I hope we'll be addressing in sessions over the next couple of days. So thank you to all of you for making time to be here with us and for starting off our conference in such a terrific way. And thank you again to the Local Arrangements Committee. We'll be talking more about the great work that they'll be doing today at lunch. So I want to invite you to join us again for lunch after the next session. So the next session begins at 10:45, and then we'll see you back here for our opening lunch and our distinguished award presentation around noon, just after that session. So thank you again. Thank you to our panel, and enjoy the opening sessions of the conference.